for the data to send and for the internet to say, Ron, you get another day. We're giving you another day. Looks like we're here, but you know me, until I see it, nothing is real. I am the doubting Thomas of the internet. That's a title that I gave myself that means nothing, but I still run with it anyway. I have seen it. It is good. I have seen it, and it is good. What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. I usually start with the afternoon for all my East Coasters. Hope your afternoon's going well. Hope lunch was good. Good evening to everyone where it's evening where you're at. That's time zone. You can only do so much. And to all my fellow West Coasters, good morning. Did you have your coffee? Did you have your breakfast? Have all your dreams come true? I hope so. Quick shout out to everyone who makes this show possible. Our friends over at ZT.com, ZHITEA.com. Their tea kind of rules. You can get their tea wholesale during the pandemic. Raspberry pecan, Monk's Blend, some of my personal favorites. And there might be a custom Ron tea coming up. Keep your fingers crossed. Also, our friends over at triageoil.com, TRIAGE oil.com. Trendy name makes pain oil that you put on your body. It has done wonders for my neck, and he educates the public on cannabis issues with his show. Check them out over at triageoil.com. And last quick announcement. Right now, the show is going through some transitions. So as of right now, we are demonetized on YouTube. We are currently demonetized. I dropped my Patreon link, and I also dropped my Venmo. So, if you want to support the show financially, the best way to do it is to either Venmo me. My Venmo is just Ron-Placone, or of course, patreon.com/Ron Placone, where for a give what you can level, you get all kinds of exclusive perks. You can download my album. You can get your own theme song, and that's all for a give what you can level. Who doesn't need their own theme song? Start your year off right with the theme song, and you can get all that over at my Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Placone. I'm working on remonetizing the channel one day at a time. All right, without further ado, I am incredibly excited for my guest today. A lot of you probably already know him. He is a professor of economics emeritus at UMass Amherst, which I hear is a really cool town. I've actually never been there, but I hear it's a really cool town. He's the founder of Democracy at Work, the organization, and his podcast, Economic Update, I'm a regular listener of. And his newest book is called The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Please welcome to the show, Dr. Richard Wolff. How are you, Dr. Wolff?
Very well, Ron. Thanks to be here, and grateful that we can talk, at least in an open way, for another day.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty much. I feel like we're in a time where it's like we're not even one day at a time right now. We're just like 1 hour at a time. You're just kind of like, are we okay? Are we all right? 1 hour, we're good. Okay, is everyone okay? And that's kind of all you can take it. So I want to jump right in because I know you only have so much time, and there is a ton of things I want to ask you. And I want to start very basic. In your words, what is capitalism?
It's a wonderful question. It's one of those things which we don't talk about, and then when we finally have to, we discover we should have been talking about it all along, Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, let me be very honest and put my cards on the table. This question, really good one, has bedeviled people who've thought about it for a long time. There's no way to be honest without telling you that different people have understood what this word means throughout history. It is not something we all agree on. It never was. So I'm about to tell you what I think it means, but I don't want to pretend that it's what everybody believes. So here's what it means to me. Capitalism is a distinctive way of organizing the production and distribution of goods and services. The food, the clothing, the shelter, and all the rest of it that make up the material part of our lives and shapes literally everything we think and do in profound ways. And the human race, in the history of us as a species, has devised different ways of doing that, of organizing the production and distribution of goods and services. Capitalism is only one of them. I'll give you a couple of others, and then you can see how distinctive capitalism is. Mm-hmm. In slavery, you organized production by having two positions that human beings can occupy. You're either the master or you're the slave. The master makes all the decisions, what to produce, what technology to use, where to carry out the production, and what to do with the output. The slaves make the output. They do the work, but they are excluded from deciding the what and the how and the where and what's done with the output. All of the output of the slaves belongs instantaneously to the master, who may or may not give back enough to the slaves to keep them going. But we define slavery as master and slave as the organization of production. Feudalism is a different one. There we have a lord and a serf. It's different from slavery because the lord doesn't own the serf. Nobody can own anybody else. That's a fundamental difference. The serf swears a personal loyalty to the lord, which is why the serf does what the lord tells him, because the lord says, I will protect you if you swear your allegiance to me. And that's why they have all those ceremonies to do that. Well, capitalism, here it comes, is different. It's not slavery because we don't allow one person to own another. And it isn't feudalism because some people do not swear loyalty to other people in the production process. Instead, we have a very different deal. We divide people not into master-slave or lord and serf. We divide people instead into employer and employee. And a deal is made, a voluntary deal. I, the worker, the employee, I'll come and work for you 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and you, in turn, are going to pay me a certain amount of money Friday afternoon before I go home. It's a contract, it's a deal, and it's different in that way from both feudalism and slavery. But it is also similar in one key way. A very small minority of the people involved in every workplace, in every enterprise, factory, office, store, a very small number of people, the owner, the board of directors, the major shareholders, that group decide what the workplace produces, what technology it uses, where the workplace will be located, and what is done with the profits generated by the enterprise. The vast majority of people, employees, have to live with those decisions, but are excluded from making them. This is a fundamental problem of capitalism that you can't resolve within capitalism because it is what capitalism is as a system.
So, yeah, I think would you say it's fair to say there's a lot of myths associated with capitalism that we're kind of taught that are just total falsehoods? I mean, this is kind of a goofy example. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, let me give you a couple that are very well known. If you pick up the New York Times or any other major newspaper in America, you'll see references to capitalism in which it is equated with something called the market or the market system or free markets or free enterprises. Okay, this is very bizarre because there's nothing unique about capitalism in having markets. If you know anything about, for example, slavery in the United States before the Civil War, every major American city in the American South has a historical monument in downtown Savannah or Atlanta or Charlotte or St. Petersburg or anywhere else to the slave markets that existed in those parts of those cities. Slaves were bought and sold. The cotton that slaves picked was bought and sold. Slavery coexisted with markets. There's nothing capitalist about a market. Shouldn't call capitalism a market system. Feudal plantations with lords and serfs often had markets. So to call capitalism a market system is a mistake, but it's a mistake with a purpose. Because what it does is it focuses you on how goods and services were distributed, because that's what markets do. Markets is how you move. If I make a shirt and you make bread, a market is where I exchange my shirts to get some of your bread, and you give me some of your bread to get some of the shirts I produce, because I want to eat bread and you want to wear a shirt. So a market is a way of distributing things, and it takes attention away from the organization of production. In the world of markets, there's a kind of rough equality. I don't give you my shirts unless I get a number of pieces of bread that satisfy me. And likewise, you're not going to, you see the point? It's a kind of a fairsies game. Whereas if you looked at production, the unfairness of it would blow you away. So yeah, there are a lot of myths, but they're not innocent. They're usually there for a very important political purpose.
Yeah, no, it's. I was going to say one of the a kind of like goofier example of some of the stuff you just said. I inevitably get this all the time on Twitter, as sure as the day is long. Well, Ron, you're a comedian and you say you're not for capitalism, but there's a ticket price to come to your shows. How do you explain? And I'm like, that's not what it is. Like, so now I can just point them to this podcast in the future.
Yes, please. Listen, by the way, Ron, I want to take my hat off to you because, I'm a teacher, and a teacher learns when he or she's a teacher that the most important thing is always the question. The answer kind of comes out of the question. The genius is the question. Asking me the question you just did, that is an extremely important thing. I don't mean to flatter you, but if you're flattered, good. Asking that question about the myths, it takes me weeks in my classes to get students to get what you've asked about, and you got to it very quickly. So thank you to you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. Well, I want to ask about a specific thing you did recently. You recently did a video for the Gravel Institute that I liked an awful lot about the whole idea that capitalism eliminates poverty. This is something that you've heard repeated time and time again. I know Bono from U2 repeated it famously a couple months ago. And you made a video kind of exposing why that's not true. Can you kind of summarize that video for anyone who hasn't seen it yet?
Sure. Yeah, the Gravel Institute did a fine job of making an animation that, it's a wonderful way of demonstrating the way in which pictures can be more effective than words often.
Did you dig the animation of you? I thought it was really cool, the approach they took.
Yeah,
did you like it?
I really thought it was wonderful work, and I worked closely with them. They went back and forth with me. I was very impressed at how they were concerned to get the logic of the argument right so that it would work with their animations. But yes, I think it's very effective. It has gone like wildfire. We've only had it out a few days, and we're well over 100,000 views, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are basically three ways that the notion that capitalism has done away with poverty is mistaken. Number one, the basic logic comes from a decision that a number of international agencies, like the United Nations, have used to define what poverty means. And to give you the example that the animation starts with, one of them is, are you living off of less than $1.97 per day? If you live under that, if you have less than that, you are considered poor. And I don't need to explain to Americans that if you tried to live on $1.97 a day, that's for your food, your clothing, your shelter, and everything else, you sure would be poor because it's impossible. You wouldn't just be poor. In a short time, you'd be dead.
Despite how the government response to a pandemic would have you believe.
Exactly. So there's a real problem. The minute you move the number up, not to the stratosphere, to say, I don't know, $5 a day or 10, which again, for many people would be horrible poverty, then it turns out the numbers don't work. Capitalism hasn't done it. So again, there's a little bit of a game here with numbers. But there are more important reasons. The one reason the numbers look, even with their craziness, reasonably good if you use those numbers, is because of one country that has made most of the change over the last 50 to 100 years. One of the poorest countries on earth turned out over the last couple of centuries to also be the biggest country on earth, namely China. And China went from the poor extreme to now a middle-level country. They are the success story. If you take China out of those statistics, it turns out that capitalism has not reduced poverty globally. It's really a story of one country. And here comes the double whammy. That country rejected capitalism in 1949 when they made a revolution. That's 70 years ago. And they have been a Communist Party governed society since 1949 with the victory of their revolution. So the country that explains the reduction of global poverty the most is a country that officially rejected capitalism and did not embrace it. And the third thing, which for me is the most important, is that there's an outrageousness about this claim. Because if you look at the history of the last 300 years, in every capitalist country, the following is true. Every effort to help get people out of poverty was opposed by capitalists, was delayed by capitalists. For example, we have in the United States and in many countries something called a minimum wage. Well, I can show you if you want. When the minimum wage was proposed in the 1930s in the United States, it was opposed by the Chamber of Commerce. It was opposed by the Business and Industry Association. Capitalists fought it. If you want something more recent, I can show you last year there was a bill in the Congress to raise the minimum wage. The Republicans opposed it. The Democrats were kind of split about it. But capitalists have been fighting against higher wages, against a minimum wage, against subsidies for poor people, against welfare. Everything that helps poor people, capitalists have opposed historically. That's why there's something really disgusting about hearing today that the people who opposed the reduction of poverty now want to be given credit as if they, in their great generosity, did this thing. They didn't. It was the pressure from below. In the 1930s, for example, it was a coalition of the labor unions of America, socialist parties, and the Communist Party that together went to Franklin Roosevelt, the president, and pushed for minimum wage. It wasn't something capitalists thought up. It wasn't a gift that the capitalists gave. It was something pressured and forced out of them over their opposition. You put all that together, and I don't think you can sustain the idea that capitalism reduced poverty.
I want to piggyback off of something you mentioned there. You mentioned the coalitions that were happening, in the 30s, around the time, we got a New Deal and stuff like that. Do you see those types of coalitions today, or do you kind of see a very fragmented society?
I see a very fragmented society, but I also see that a fragmented society is slowly, and boy, do I regret how slow it is, but it is slowly figuring out what you just said, that the disorganization, the fragmentation is allowing things to happen that are simply unbearable, unjustifiable. I mean, I'm going to give you two examples, Over the last 10 months, life has been very, very hard here in the United States, and of course, not only here. We have had the worst disease in a century. The last time we had a virus like this was in 1918, literally over 100 years ago. And we've had a government and a private sector that weren't prepared for this virus, although they should have been unable to contain this virus, although they should have, and are now messing up the vaccine process in a way that is unjustifiable. Look at these failures. Don't pretend that they weren't that. The countries that have done better on this disease than we are include New Zealand, China, South Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam, Cuba, capitalist countries, socialist countries, countries with many fewer resources than we have. There is no excuse. Look what is happening. It is very serious. Over the last 10 months, here I'm going to put my economist hat on for you. Over the last 10 months, roughly 60 million Americans have had to go file for unemployment compensation because they've been out of work for some or all of those 10 months. During the time, and remember, when you're unemployed, even if it's only for a few weeks, you use up your savings, you lean on the people in your family to help you out, maybe your relatives, maybe your neighbors, maybe your community. You use up whatever reserves you have to get through this awful experience. So people are real, and you have to stay home. You're scared to death that you're going to get the disease. You know that if you're not working, those debts you have are creeping up on you, whether it's your mortgage you can't pay, or your credit card bill at the end of the month, or your child's credit for going to college, etc., etc. Really hard times. And during the time that tens of millions have had difficulty, the 600 billionaires in this country, roughly how many we have, 600, got much, much richer. According to Bloomberg Business News, almost $2 trillion richer these already rich people got. What kind of a society would put the majority of its people through a really hard time while those who are the richest amongst us become much richer? No morality I know of, no ethics I ever heard of could justify, just on the most basic human solidarity notion of any kind of moral, to allow this. If we don't get involved, if we don't stop our fragmentation, this kind of horror show will go on. And by the way, not the least outgrowth of this kind of pressure on the mass of people shows up in a weird government like that of a certain orange-haired person, or weird moments like what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. These are themselves a collection of symptoms that you've got to be blind, deaf, and dumb not to realize that the system we are living in is either falling apart or blowing up, and that we better do something about.
So I have a couple questions. One is kind of more like big picture, and then one is kind of more in the contemporary sense. So what you call for in your work, and you've been doing this your entire career, is a big shift from the status quo. So a question that I'm sure you get all the time, that I get all the time, is, well, how would a transition like this happen? How would the United States transition into a more socialist or social democratic society compared to what it is now? How do you address that?
Well, you know, there's a lot of ways, but rather than speculating or giving you some idea of mine, let me give you an example recently of a society that had a significant movement to do that. And I'm going to be talking about a country not that different from us, the United Kingdom, Britain, Great Britain. They have two major parties like we do, only they're called the Conservative Party and the Labour Party instead of Republican and Democrat. Okay, the Labour Party, the number two party there, and it's been the number two party for over a century. The Labour Party has a plan. Particularly under the former leadership, not the current leadership, but the leadership that was associated with a fellow called Jeremy Corbyn. You might think of him as the Bernie Sanders of Great Britain or something like that. Okay, here was his idea. We are going to pass a law, he said, if we get to be the next government, if we win the next election, which they may, we're going to pass a law. And here's what it's going to do. It's going to say to every company in America, in Britain, if you want to keep going the way you are, fine, no problem. But if you were to decide to change in any of the following ways, if you propose to close your business, or you propose to sell your business to somebody else, or you propose to make your business into a shareholder business by going public and issuing shares, or if you move overseas, you make any of those basic decisions, the law is going to require you to give your own workers something called the legal right of first refusal. And what that means is the owner of the company has to go to the workers and say, I'm thinking of leaving, I'm thinking of closing, I'm thinking of selling, but I have to, according to this law, give you the option of buying the company from me and converting it into a worker co-op instead of a capitalist enterprise the way it has been. That's the law. And if you ask, well, where would the workers get the money? Then the Jeremy Corbyn would smile and answer to the news question coming at him. The government will lend the money to the workers so that they can do it. Why? We want to develop in Great Britain a worker co-op sector of the economy. We want all over the country the British people to have a choice, which they don't have now, to see in the community businesses organized in the capitalist way, top down, owner, board of directors, and all of that. But side by side, enterprises organized democratically, where everybody has one vote and the decisions of the majority will determine what's produced, how it's produced, where it's produced, and how you pay different people. Everyone is going to see the difference in practice between capitalism and a socialistic worker co-op alternative. Because then, when everyone sees it, experiences it, then we can have a genuine vote of the British people. What kind of economy do you want? You want a mixture of both of them? You want one kind only? But then it will be a democratic decision. You can't do that if people have no experience of what worker co-ops are like, what they're like to work in, what they're like to buy from. Okay, my answer to your question, let's do that. Let's do that here. And by the way, let me give you an example you may enjoy from Italy, which has gone even further than this. And I admire them. They passed a law in 1985 in Italy called the Marcora Law, named after the Italian legislator Marcora, who pushed it through the Italian parliament. Here's what the law says. If you lose your job, you have two choices. Number one, you can get unemployment insurance, just like here in America. You file papers, you get a check every week to help you through the period of unemployment. But you can do something else. You have a choice. No such choice exists in the United States. And by the way, the bill was passed in 1985. It is still the law right now in Italy as we speak. The second option that you can choose, if you find 9 other unemployed people, at least 9, of course it could be more, to make the same decision as you, the Italian government gives you this option. We will give you the entire amount of unemployment insurance that you would have gotten week by week over a year's period of time. We'll give it to you and the 9 others as a lump sum right now on the following condition. You use it to start and operate a worker co-op enterprise. And people in Italy have been doing it. It's one of the reasons why Italy has more worker co-ops than any other European country. In fact, if you go to the Italian province of Emilia-Romagna, it's the area around the northern city of Bologna.
Sì, molto bellissimo. Ho la famiglia a Bologna.
Okay.
I got family there.
Okay, 40% of the Emilia-Romagna economy is worker co-ops. 40, almost half. It's been that way for decades. You want to see the success of worker co-ops? Go there. It's right there. You don't have to speculate. It's not a utopian dream for the future. It's an actuality. We could. I won't embarrass your listeners. I won't embarrass anyone by asking whether you knew what I just said. Of course, most people don't, because that information is not distributed here in the United States, and that's no accident either. But here I am telling you, we have the ways to introduce a worker co-op sector of the American economy. We have the British idea of how to do it. We have the reality in Italy. We have the Mondragon Corporation in Spain, which has gone even further along these ways. We have plenty of information, plenty of models to move in that direction in this country. The only thing we lack is a political movement to make it happen.
So I want to ask you on the micro level then, one thing that you do not do on your podcast, which I really appreciate, you do not sugarcoat electoralism at all. You do not sugarcoat what Joe Biden is. But I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things we can push for realistically with this incoming administration that's, coming in whether we like it or not?
Okay, let me be honest with you. I know personally some of the people that Biden has collected around him, and I know about the careers of others. Here's what I mean. The new Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, was a classmate of mine at Yale University. We got our PhDs in economics at the same time. We took the same classes. We had the same professors. I know what her education was because it's the same as my own. And I have followed her career ever since. I know Jared Bernstein. I know Heather Boucher. I know some of the people that he's gathered around him. Nice people, good people, honest people. I have no quarrel with them as human beings at all. But there's nothing in their careers that has ever made them, at least not in public or in private that I know of, question the capitalist system. They're not willing to ask the question, could the problems we have and our failure to find solutions be something systemic so that we really have to change the system to solve them? Let me give you an example. The inequality that we have in the United States today, you know what it's like? It's like the inequality we had at the end of the last century and the end of the century before that. Inequality is not a new problem. It is an old problem that capitalism has failed to solve. We've had anti-poverty programs from here to tomorrow. Lyndon Johnson had famous anti-poverty programs. Kennedy did. Even Eisenhower did. They all promised that they would do something about inequality. And yet it is worse now than it was 50 years ago. It's worse now than it was 100 years ago. And that's not because people are bad or stupid or anything else. It's a systemic problem that people don't want to see as a systemic problem. So they fritter around the edges. They change a law. They do this. They improve education. Things that are nice in themselves, but they're not adequate to the depth of the problem. And that's my fear. So let me give you a concrete answer. One of the first things I would do is borrow something that worked in the 1930s that Franklin Roosevelt did. He said, he gave a speech, and here's what he said. If the private sector of our economy is either unable or unwilling to provide jobs for the millions of Americans who do not want charity, who do not want a handout, they just want a job. They want to contribute, and they want to be paid properly for their contribution. If the private sector can't do that, then there's no option but for the government to do it. And I'm going to do it, he said. And he did. Between 1934 and 1941, he hired somewhere between 10 and 15, there are debates about it, 10 and 15 million civilian people to do civilian work. I'm not talking about the military, which toward the end was important, the civilian. He did that. He hired them. He gave them a job. He gave them the self-esteem and respect that goes with a job. He paid them a decent salary so they could keep their homes and take care of their families. You want to know what we ought to have done 18 months, 10 months ago? We should have done that. Trump should have done that. He didn't do it. If Mr. Biden comes in and he doesn't do it either, then what he is doing is telling the American people, yeah, you got rid of Trump, but what you got in its place when it comes to the real basic things you need isn't all that much better. Yeah, Biden will give you a $2,000 check, whereas the Republicans only wanted to give you $600. Sure, $2,000 is more and better than $600. But if you know, as I do, that the average amount of unpaid rent by people who are behind in their rent is currently over $5,000, you will understand that giving them $2 is not the solution. It's like throwing a quarter into the hand of a beggar on the street. Is it better than nothing? You bet. Does it solve his problem? Not even close. And you have to face that. And my fear is they're not going to do that. They're not going to face, for example, the problem that we have hundreds of thousands of homeless people in the United States right now. And we have hundreds of thousands of homes and apartments sitting empty. There is no excuse for those two things to sit side by side. That's the capitalist system that makes it this irrationality necessary, because the landlord has to have rent and those poor people don't have the money to pay the rent. So the homeless people sit across the street staring at the empty apartments. But that's a systemic problem. A system that can't give everybody food, clothing, and shelter has just proven itself to be an unjustified burden on the human race.
So, yeah, and a statistic that you point out on your show that I think is so staggering that this piggybacks on everything you just said. And yeah, I heard this first on your show. Since the pandemic, there are 1 million less people providing public services. During a pandemic where it's needed the most, there's 1 million less. Like, it's calling it backwards is an understatement. There's not a word for how ridiculous that is.
Well, and look at the way our system is set up. If you have masses of people unemployed for whatever reason, those people, because they're not earning a job, the company is not doing well because that's why they got fired in the first place. So those people don't pay taxes the way they used to. The businesses don't pay taxes. So the money coming in to fund public services is exhausted. So people are unemployed. They need more help from the government, not less. But you've set up a system where the government is able to give less services as the people. This is an organization that is so dysfunctional that the amazing thing, which I expect historians in the future, looking back on this period, they're going to scratch their heads and say, how could those people have allowed such a dysfunctional system to last as long as it did?
Yeah. So I know you got an out here. Do you have a couple more minutes? I wanted to share one story with you. All right, because my show is called Get Your News On with Ron. Usually I share a story with my guests that I kind of picked out especially for them. And I got one especially for you. You may have heard about this already, or you may not have. I look forward to finding out. But one thing about me, you may or may not know, I'm a big music guy. I love music. I play guitar. And here's some news that I'm hoping you might appreciate that I just found out about recently. And this concerns a guitar company called Taylor. Taylor Guitar announces complete transition of ownership to its employees. Did you hear about this?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I thought it'd be cool if maybe you didn't, where you're just like, I didn't know that. This is going to be in the podcast. But yeah, so Taylor Guitars, and what they're doing is it's called an ESOP, where basically employees just own the company, and the folks who run it, they're hoping to kind of hand it off that way. And here's a statement from the company CEO. I don't think ESOPs are right for every company, but they're going for it. But an ESOP is good for people who want to stay involved with their company, and it's good for people who care about their business and care about helping their employees grow their wealth. Well, so what's your take on this? Is this a step in the right direction? Is this kind of an example of doing better?
Yes, I should explain to folks. ESOPs, ESOP, have been around for quite a while. It stands for Employee Stock Ownership Program, and it's been around for a while. And here's the logic that may intrigue your audience. Think of a company. I'll make one up. Mr. and Mrs. Smith start a company, and they spend their lives building it up. It starts small, Mr. and Mrs. Smith and 2 or 3 friends. But over time, they work hard, they're successful, the company grows. And now Mr. and Mrs. Smith have reached 65. The company has 200 employees. Mr. and Mrs. Smith hired every one of them. They're local people, they know them, they know their families. It's a successful business. But they've had enough, and their children don't want to work in the business. They've gone on to other lives and other kinds of work. So Mr. and Mrs. Smith have a problem. What are they going to do? They could close the business. But you know, they spent their whole lives building that business. They don't want to close it. It's successful, it's profitable, and they know that if they close it, it's not just the end of the business for them, but it's the 200 families that depend on that business that are going to be out of luck. They don't want to do that. Okay, what's their second option? They could sell the business to somebody else. But the problem is, what will that person do? They might close it. They might merge it with somebody. And they might therefore screw those 200 people that they personally know. So they don't want to do that either. And they don't want to become a public company with shareholders because, again, they don't know what those shareholders will do. How could they keep the business going, honoring the 200 people who've given lives to this business, like they have, honor the community that has supported them? Answer: an ESOP. Sell your company to the workers. They don't want it to go away because it's their livelihood. They don't want the community in which they live and upon which they depend to be hobbled by no longer getting tax revenue from this business. So if you want the business to survive, if you want the jobs to survive, if you want the community not to lose an asset, then the best thing you can do is sell the company to your own workers. And that's what's motivating people all over the United States, as well as in this case in Mexico, to do this kind of thing. And I think you're going to be seeing more and more, because I think companies are going to see that as a better option for what to do with a business than the alternatives that capitalism has presented to them.
Dr. Wolff, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. Where can everybody go to learn more and to check out all of the things you have available, with books, podcasts, etc.?
Well, I think the simplest are the following. We maintain 2 websites where all of our work is on display. It's 100% free. You can go there, no issue. One of them is called democracyatwork.info. That's all one word, democracyatwork.info. The second website is my own, RD Wolff with 2 F's, so rdwolff.com. So you can go to either of those. The third thing is we have our own weekly radio and television show called Economic Update. And it's once a week. It's out on the Free Speech TV network. It's broadcast as a radio program across the Pacifica network and about 100 stations across the United States. And we put every show up on YouTube. You just go to YouTube Economic Update or Democracy at Work, and you will get to that program. And we invite you to explore any or all of those, and you'll get all the material. We have a very active social media program, as well as these radio, TV, and various other kinds of products that we produce, mostly in the way of media that has 2 purposes. Number one, to criticize the economic system we have, to show that we as a human species can do better than capitalism. And the second part is to give some ideas of how you go about that, basically trying to ask the very questions that Ron just posed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wolff. Thanks for spending some time with me today, and I look forward to keeping in touch throughout the future. Thanks for everything you do.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for making a program like this part of people's lives. It's a very important contribution, especially now.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
That was Dr. Wolff, folks. Dr. Richard Wolff. Check out those websites that he said, Democracy at Now, Democracy at Now, Democracy at Work.info and RD Wolff with 2 Fs. .com and check out that podcast, Economic Update. It is a radio show and TV show as well. I just get it as a podcast. I just get it, on my podcast app, and I just listen to it as a podcast. You can certainly do that as well, and I highly recommend it. I listen to Economic Update pretty much every episode. Pretty much every episode I've caught. So guys, that's the show for today. I was real excited to talk to Dr. Wolff. I could have asked him questions all freaking day, but he is a busy dude. So I'm glad we got to chat with him and pick his brain for a little while there. Tomorrow, we'll be back with Lady Bunny. I can't wait to talk to her. I've been trying to get her on the show for a while, and she's going to be on the show tomorrow. You might know her from RuPaul's Drag Race, or you might know her just by being a huge lefty on Twitter. Her Twitter account's great, and we're going to be talking with her tomorrow. That happens at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Again, folks, I know I mentioned this. Right now, the show is demonetized. I'm working on changing that. We're going through some transitions tech-wise, and hopefully that's fixed up soon. But until it is, the best way to support this show, if you are able, patreon.com/Ron Placone. If you're on stable ground financially, patreon.com/Ron Placone for Give What You Can level. You get all kinds of cool content. You get a patron Zoom show once a week where I do a Zoom show just for the patrons. I do work on new material, play some tunes. We chat it out. It's a blast. I do a patron stream once a week where I respond directly to stuff the patrons have submitted. And I'll make you your own theme song. People have been loving that. You guys know the Get Your News On with Ron theme song. I make theme songs just for the patrons. All you got to do is ask for one, and you get all that for literally a Give What You Can level. Whatever you're comfortable giving. There are no tiers on my Patreon. It's whatever you're comfortable giving. So if you got an extra $1 or $2 a month, it does go a long way, and it helps keep this show on the air, especially now. Or if you want to make a one-time thing, my Venmo is Ron-Placone. And we're working on things. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. And in the meantime, check out Richard Wolff's stuff if you haven't already. rdwolff with 2fs.com, democracyatwork.info. And of course, you can just get Economic Update either via television or radio or wherever you get your podcasts. I just listen to it as a podcast myself. And in the meantime, y'all know the drill. Lucy, where's she at? Oh, she's on the chair. She was going nuts like right before the show started because there was a fly in the apartment, and Lucy was like going nuts, and I think that's why she was going nuts. I played with her a little. I played with her a little bit to calm her down, but she was still going nuts. So it's not that she just wanted to play. She just also, I think she saw the fly. Maybe she caught it because I haven't seen it. And she's really chill right now. So either the fly wore her out or I don't know. But you know the drill. Lucy says, meow, get the fly. Lucy says, meow. And I say, peace. Peace.